The cold wind bit through Helen Carter's cardigan as she stepped into the garage that had somehow become her bedroom. She reached for the light switch, illuminating a narrow cot squeezed between cardboard boxes, rusted garden tools, and a dusty lawnmower. The faint hum of a space heater did little to cut through the chill of a New England winter night. Just 50 feet away, warm golden light spilled from the windows of the house she and her late husband Frank had built together. It used to be her home. Now it was where her daughter Emily and son-in-law Derek hosted dinner parties with their polished friends, laughing over crystal glasses. Helen herself had once unpacked with trembling, excited fingers on her wedding day. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't temporary. It was a decision made without her voice, her comfort, or her dignity. "I gave them everything," she whispered into the stale air. "The house, the memories, the roots beneath their feet. And now I sleep beside a rake." To some, it might sound like a tragic joke. To Helen, it was the cold reality of a choice she made from love. A choice that led her to the very edge of invisibility. And tonight, as the frost crept in through the cracks in the garage door, Helen decided something had to change. Not out of anger, not even revenge, but to remember who she really was and make sure they remembered, too. Long before she found herself sleeping beside rusted tools and cardboard boxes, Helen Carter was someone people admired. She was sharp, poised, and respected not just as the wife of a man who built homes, but as the woman who built the business behind them. She and Frank Carter met in their 20s. Frank was a skilled carpenter with calloused hands and a heart of gold. Helen, fresh out of college with a degree in finance, saw potential not just in him, but in the future they could build together. Within 5 years, they had founded Carter Company Construction, a small firm that grew into a trusted name across Maple Hill and the surrounding counties. The home they lived in was their greatest project. A white colonial with deep blue shutters, a wraparound porch, and a reading nook under the stairs that Helen personally designed. It wasn't just 4 walls. It was the scrapbook of their marriage. Every tile, molding, and corner told a story. Frank passed away after a short, brutal battle with cancer. The man who once lifted beams with ease had grown frail in just months. Helen never forgot the way he looked at her from that hospital bed. "Promise me," he had whispered, his voice cracked from weeks of chemo, "that you'll take care of Emily no matter what." And Helen did promise. Emily was their only child. Bright, charming, and full of life, she had always been the center of their world. Dance lessons, summer camps, private schools, and study abroad trips. Nothing had ever been too much. Helen wanted her to have the life she never had. And for years, that decision seemed to be the right one. Helen poured her energy into making Emily's world beautiful, even if it meant erasing parts of her own. She downsized her wardrobe so Emily could wear the latest trends. She skipped vacations so Emily could attend elite programs. Now standing in a garage with bare concrete floors and a rickety cot, Helen was beginning to wonder if she had raised a daughter who only knew how to receive, but never how to give back. Because the woman who had once balanced payrolls, managed contracts, and held her family together was now struggling to stay warm in the shadow of the very home she built. Emily met Derek Matthews during her final year at Stanford. He was the kind of man who turned heads in a room, tall, clean-cut, always impeccably dressed. He worked in wealth management and spoke with a confidence that bordered on rehearsed charm. Helen's first impression was simple. He was polished, maybe too polished, but Emily was in love, glowing with the certainty only youth could carry. "He's different, Mom," she had said over coffee one afternoon. "He listens, he plans. He wants the same things I do." Frank, ever the optimist, had taken to Derek quickly. "The boy's got manners," he said, with a chuckle and a firm handshake. Still, Helen couldn't shake a strange feeling. It wasn't anything he said outright. It was what he avoided. He rarely asked about the family business or their shared history. He changed the subject when talk of Helen's work came up, often redirecting focus toward the future he and Emily were building. The wedding was grand, more elaborate than Helen and Frank had envisioned, but they stayed quiet. Emily looked radiant, and that was all that mattered. Derek's parents insisted on hosting the reception at a country club instead of the Carter family home. "Your house is lovely," Derek's mother had said politely, "but it's just not quite big enough for our guest list." Helen had bitten her tongue, reminding herself this was Emily's moment. But the undertone was clear. Their version of success didn't include the Carters' warmth or history. It was about image. After the honeymoon, Derek began floating ideas over Sunday dinners. "Emily misses Maple Hill," he said. "She talks about raising kids in the house she grew up in." It sounded sentimental at first, almost sweet, but Helen now realized it was a carefully worded pitch. Slowly, gently, he had begun steering them toward a future where he controlled not just Emily's heart, but the roof over their heads. And Helen, still grieving Frank, still clinging to her promise, didn't see the trap being laid until it had already closed around her. The day Helen signed over the deed to the house was warm. The kind of spring afternoon where everything feels like it's beginning again. Emily hugged her tightly, tears in her eyes, saying, "Mom, this means the world to me." And in that moment, it felt right. Helen kept one thing for herself, the guest suite, a cozy private space with its own entrance originally built for her mother years ago. It was understood, even spoken aloud, that she would continue living there. "This will always be your home, too," Emily had said. For a while, things were good. Helen stayed out of the way, giving the newlyweds space. She volunteered at the community center, met friends for lunch, and enjoyed quiet evenings reading in her room. Emily would occasionally stop by for tea. Derek was polite, though distant. Then came the subtle shifts. One weekend, Helen returned from a book club meeting to find the kitchen reorganized. Her baking dishes, used only on special occasions, were stacked on the highest shelf. "We just needed more space," Emily said with a laugh, not meeting her eyes. Another time during a dinner party, Helen was asked to enter through the side door. "Some of Derek's colleagues are here," Emily explained. "He just wants to keep things professional." Helen nodded, but something inside her began to tighten. Soon after, without warning, contractors arrived. The master bedroom where Helen and Frank had shared decades of memories was being gutted. The hand-carved cabinets Frank had made were gone, the reading nook demolished. "We're modernizing," Emily said. "Derek thinks the house needs a cohesive style." It echoed in Helen's head for days. Every change erased a piece of her husband, a memory, a legacy. Martha, her oldest friend, voiced what Helen had only begun to suspect. "They're phasing you out," she said bluntly one afternoon over coffee. "And you're letting them?" Helen tried to defend Emily. "She doesn't mean to hurt me." But the truth was starting to settle, heavy and undeniable. The home she gave as a gift had become a stage for someone else's version of success, a version that had no space for her. She had given everything thinking it was love, but now she was beginning to understand. Sometimes people accept your sacrifices not out of love, but because they know you won't stop giving. It happened on a Sunday evening. Helen had just returned from a weekend visiting her sister 2 towns over. She pulled into the driveway, suitcase in hand, only to find her bedroom door locked. Confused, she knocked. No answer. Then she noticed a small note taped to the door. "We've temporarily moved your things to the garage. We'll explain soon." Her chest tightened. The garage sat at the far end of the property. It had once held Frank's tools, lawn equipment, and their old bicycles. Now inside, she found a cot hastily set up against the wall, a small dresser, a dim lamp, and a cheap space heater buzzing weakly in the corner. Emily met her there, eyes nervous. "Derek's parents are staying for a few weeks," she said quickly. "We didn't want to stress you with all the planning. It's just for a little while." Helen stared at her. "Emily, it's November. The garage isn't insulated." "There's a heater," Emily replied, avoiding eye contact. "And we brought down extra blankets." Helen felt something break inside her. Not a crack, a quiet, irreversible fracture. Days passed. Then weeks. Derek's parents left, but the garage remained hers. When Helen asked if she could move back, Emily made excuses. Derek's work friend needed a place to stay, or the guest suite needed repainting. Winter hit hard. The heater struggled. Helen's cough worsened. She tried to hide it at first, old habit, but Martha noticed. "You're not okay," she said, driving her to see Dr. Lynn, a physician at the local clinic. After a quick exam, the diagnosis was clear: respiratory infection, likely from prolonged exposure to cold and poor ventilation. "This is not a suitable environment," Dr. Lynn said firmly. "Especially at your age." Martha was livid. "You are not going back there." But Helen wasn't ready to fight. Not yet. She returned to the garage, wrapped herself in 3 blankets, and sat quietly on the cot. She looked around. A box labeled Christmas 1996, Frank's old drill. A faded photograph of Emily in a tutu. Everything in that garage held meaning more than the house ever would now. She began to ask herself things she had avoided for too long. When had Emily stopped seeing her as a mother? Why had Helen allowed herself to be erased piece by piece? And what would Frank say if he saw her now? That night, as laughter spilled from the house she had built, Helen stared at the ceiling and whispered to herself, "This is not love. This is not what we built our life for." And in that stillness, for the first time, she didn't just feel hurt. She felt angry. Helen didn't plan the confrontation. It wasn't rehearsed. It simply rose inside her like a tide, no longer willing to recede. It was a Thursday evening. From the garage, she heard music, clinking glasses, and the smooth cadence of Derrick's voice entertaining guests. She looked down at her worn slippers, then at the blister pack of antibiotics on her nightstand. She hadn't even told Emily she was sick. Enough. She walked across the lawn, the cold grass crunching beneath her feet. At the front door, the door she once opened to family, laughter, and birthday celebrations echoed. Emily answered, half opening it. "Mom, now's not a good time. Derrick's entertaining clients." Helen didn't flinch. "I need to speak with both of you now." From behind her, Derrick appeared, wineglass in hand. "Helen, let's not do this right now. We'll bring you more blankets." "No," Helen said, her voice firm. "I've just come back from the doctor. I'm ill, Derrick, from sleeping in that garage. And before you offer me another blanket, maybe ask yourself what kind of man needs his mother-in-law to sleep next to a rake so he can impress his friends." Silence fell behind him. 2 guests, sitting at her old dining room table, turned their heads. Helen looked straight at them. "Good evening," she said, calm and clear. "I'm Helen Carter. This used to be my home. I built it with my husband. I gave it to my daughter, and now I sleep in the garage while my son-in-law plays host." Emily's face flushed. "Mom, please," Helen turned to her. "I asked you once to protect this family. Instead, you protect his image." Derrick stepped forward. "You're being dramatic. This isn't helping anyone." Helen didn't respond. She held Emily's gaze just long enough to see the hesitation, the conflict, but also the choice. Emily's voice was tight. "If you're unhappy, maybe it's time to consider other arrangements." Helen blinked. There it was. Her daughter was asking her to leave, to disappear, to unburden the life she had made possible. Helen nodded slowly. "You're right. I'll consider other options." And with that she turned, walking back toward the garage, not defeated, but awake. For the first time, her steps weren't weighed down by grief. They were driven by clarity. Helen sat on the edge of her cot, the air still bitter, despite the heater's constant hum. In her hand was an old photo of Frank holding newborn Emily, his face alight with pride. She traced the edges with her finger, then reached for her phone. She scrolled past recent calls. Emily, Martha, the clinic. Then she stopped at a name she hadn't dialed in years. Bill Townsend. Bill had been Frank's business partner since the early days of Carter Company. More than that, he was one of the few who truly understood what Helen had built behind the scenes. While Frank handled the work sites, Helen had quietly diversified their investments. Real estate, silent partnerships, a mountain cabin in Vermont under a trust only she and Bill knew existed. She hesitated for a moment. Once she made this call, there'd be no going back. No more silence. No more waiting for kindness from people who didn't understand its value. She pressed the button. The line rang 3 times. "Helen Carter." Bill's voice came warm and familiar. "It's been a long time." "Too long," Helen replied. Her voice cracked, not from weakness, but the weight of everything left unsaid. "Bill, I need your help. It's time." A pause, then a chuckle. "I always told Frank you'd wait too long. What's Derrick done?" Helen exhaled slowly. "Everything I feared. Bill didn't need more." He knew. "Say no more. I'll be there by the weekend. We'll put the plan into motion." For the first time in months, Helen felt her breath settle. Her eyes drifted back to the photo on the nightstand. "I tried, Frank," she whispered, "but now it's time to try something else." As she ended the call, the chill in the air didn't feel quite as sharp. The garage was still cold, still makeshift. But Helen Carter was no longer a woman waiting for someone to save her. She was preparing to reclaim everything she gave away and remind the world exactly who she was. Bill arrived 3 days later, just as promised. He looked older, grayer, slower on his feet, but his eyes were sharp as ever. When Helen met him at a quiet corner table in a downtown cafe, he studied her closely, his expression darkening. "You've lost weight," he said quietly. "And that cough, Helen, this never should have happened." She waved him off just like she always had when someone worried. "It won't happen again." Together, they reviewed everything: the trusts, the investment accounts, the properties. Helen still held majority interest in 2 real estate firms, owned a fully paid cabin in Vermont, and had a silent claim on a commercial development just outside Boston, the house she gave away. It was sentimental, but never the full picture. Over the next week, Helen met with an estate lawyer. She rewrote her will. Everything, the wealth, the investments, the cabin, would go to a scholarship fund in Frank's name to support women pursuing careers in construction and business. A nod to the life she had built quietly in a man's world. Emily and Dererick would receive nothing. She also instructed her attorney to send a formal letter to the household notifying them that she would be vacating the property and that no further contact should be attempted regarding financial matters. Then she packed her few things: the space heater, a faded photo album, a single mug that still had Frank's initials on the bottom. Helen didn't slam the garage door when she left. She didn't need to. Some exits don't need noise. They just need resolve. And Helen Carter had rediscovered hers. This wasn't revenge, not really. It was justice. It was clarity. It was the re-entering of a woman who had given too much for too long and finally remembered her worth. Helen Carter never looked back. She settled into her cabin in Vermont, a quiet place surrounded by pine trees and silence. But the kind of silence that heals, not the kind that isolates. She spent her mornings reading, her afternoons walking trails Frank once dreamed of retiring to, and her evenings writing letters to herself, letters she wished someone else had written her years ago. Not long after, she received a message from Emily. A short one, confused, upset, demanding answers. Helen didn't reply because sometimes silence is the only language people understand when they've ignored every other one. What Helen learned, what we all sometimes need to learn, is this. Love does not mean sacrificing your dignity. Family does not mean tolerating disrespect. And kindness is never an excuse for being treated like less. So, if you've ever been the one giving endlessly, waiting for someone to notice your quiet sacrifice, this story is for you. Stand up, step back, reclaim your space. Helen Carter did, and so can you. If this story moved you, share it. Someone else might be living in a garage of their own, waiting for a sign to walk out. And if that's you, let this be your sign. Let us know in the comment, where are you watching from? Please subscribe to the channel Her Side of the Story. Thanks for watching until here.